Apple is widely regarded as a premium brand. Their gizmos have premium prices, they're seen as almost luxury items, and of course they're seen as, well, more safe and secure than, say, Windows or Android. In fact, even some intelligence agencies have now told us that Apple gizmos are not as safe as we think. Hi and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus the Tribble. So, got sent a link the other day, read the article, nearly fell off my chair. So, let's take a peek. So the title of the article is Western Spies Targeted Phones of Russian Officials. This is actually from RT. You can find the same story with the exact same information on the likes of MSN and Bloomberg and various American news outlets. They've all got pretty much the same information, but this one kind of comes straight from the horse's mouth. So they write that the FSB said its operatives uncovered one of the largest spying operations, malicious software, on mobile devices, and that this scheme had attempted to gather data through covert access to content and messaging, wiretapping of phone conversations, acoustic and video surveillance, blah, blah, blah. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking Android smartphones, right? Hang on. Scrolling down, we read, according to the FSB, the investigation, which began in 2023, after experts at Russian cybersecurity firm Kaspersky Lab detected unusual network activity on employees' Apple devices. And then the Kaspersky Lab employee explains that the way this worked was you didn't have to do anything. By simply owning an iPhone, you could be sent a regular message on the standard Apple messaging app, and without even needing to read the message or do anything, malware would be installed on the iPhone, and boom, they literally had full control of the phone. They could use it to record 3-hour audio clips, and then when the phone reconnected to the network, it would send it to supposedly a foreign intelligence agency. Right, so not Android, Apple devices. The iPhone, the phones that everyone thinks are mega secure. You don't need any anti-malware software to protect yourself because they're so secure out of the box. You just fire it up and carry on. Now, the Russian FSB is not saying exactly who did the spying, but back in 2023, it was alleged that it was the Americans spying on the Russians. So one thing we need to understand here, that when we talk about intelligence agencies doing spying, everyone is spying on everyone else. I mean, like, we spy not just on our enemies, we spy on our friends. And our friends spy on us and their enemies. And like, literally everyone spies on everyone. That's why they have enormous budgets, and that's simply what they do. For example, back in 2013, it was discovered that the U.S. was spying on then-Chancellor, German Chancellor Angela Merkel's smartphone. And, there was all this hullabaloo and whatever. Just recently, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency came out and said, we've raised the threat level to our highest level for all American officials because the Israelis are apparently beefing up their spying operations on American officials. You know, the U.S. and Israel, supposedly allies. But at this point, you're probably going, hang on, Scotty, I thought Apple devices were super secure. This sounds like a zero-day exploit. They call it a zero-day exploit because it's literally day zero. When you have an exploit that, like in this case, you just send a message, boom, just like that, the phone is totally yours. You have complete control. That type of malware, when it's brand new and when there are no fixes, no patches, it's literally hot off the press, and every device out there is vulnerable because there are no fixes for it, they call that a zero-day exploit. So, of course, the perception is that Apple devices are safer because there are far fewer exploits, right? In fact, almost none. Not exactly. You can hop on the internet and look up zero-day exploits, and you'll find pretty graphs like this one. Now, as you can see here, okay, Microsoft in the past 20 years, between 2006 and 2026, In the past 20 years, Microsoft accounted for 34% of zero-day exploits. No big surprise there. But then, down in the lower left-hand corner in that sort of faded text, you see Apple Inc. with 7.5% of zero-day exploits. Most people, I think, would say it's closer to zero. Nope, in the past 20 years, 7.5% of zero-day exploits were for Apple software running on Apple devices. And then just above that, you notice Mozilla, 1.15%. Now that's pretty interesting because Firefox has been a bit on the hot seat lately for vulnerabilities in their browser and yada, yada, yada. Well, in the past 20 years, Mozilla had a little over 1% of all the zero-day exploits, whereas Apple had 7.5 times as many. So we know that there are many actual exploits for Apple devices. It's just that nobody really talks about it because everyone is focused on the most popular software, which is pretty much Windows. But then at this point you're going, hang on a minute, Scotty, isn't Apple the company who refused to open their iPhone to the FBI not so long ago? Yes. In this article from 9to5Mac, entitled Contrasting Apple Standing Up to the FBI with Microsoft BitLocker Keys Isn't Fair, we learn that there was a shooting in San Bernardino back in 2015. 14 people died, and the FBI wanted to access the data on the iPhone of one of the shooters. And of course, here again, there was a whole lot of hullabaloo because Apple basically said no. And supposedly the reason they said no was because unlocking that one iPhone would give the FBI the keys to the kingdom to all iPhones. Okay, now that has to be simply nonsense for public consumption, like a PR stunt or something, because you don't do encryption by having one key that unlocks everybody's device. You have, say, end-to-end encryption where you have multiple keys, one per device. So I'm not exactly sure how this was supposed to work, but that sounds like a load of nonsense to me. Still, of course, Apple was seen to have stood up to the FBI and to not give in and like, no, we will protect our consumers. And yet we know that there are tons of exploits for Apple devices, just like for Android devices. And so what? Apple is willing to protect an American criminal, but they're not willing to protect the Russians? Or something doesn't add up here. When you look at all this, you're going like, hang on a minute, what's going on? And the simple fact of the matter is that literally no one stands up to the intelligence agencies and lives to tell about it. If you do, you might find your car careening off some cliff somewhere. You might find yourself wearing some shiny new concrete shoes, taking a nice visit to the bottom of some river somewhere. Or you might find yourself suicided by, say multiple shotgun blasts. That one is my personal favorite. It came from a true story. So yeah, you don't say no to intelligence agencies. So how did Apple get away with it? That's always bothered me. What exactly is going on here? Well, I can't say for sure, but there are some things that I can say for sure, and they make for some interesting food for thought. The first point is, think about when you see a photo or a video of powerful people, politicians, diplomats, CEOs, actors. What kind of phone do they always have in their hand? Not always, but most of the time. iPhones. They are seen as a premium brand. They are seen as extra secure. In fact, something like 60% of Americans also own an iPhone. That's not true of other countries like Europe and Asia and Africa. Far more people have Android phones there. But the politicians in Europe and other continents, most of them have iPhones. So if Apple gives up the keys to the kingdom when the FBI or some other alphabet soup agency comes knocking, all of these people who have positions of power and influence and who have an iPhone suddenly don't want their iPhone anymore. They'll want to switch to something more secure. That would be bad for Apple. That would be bad for the intelligence agencies. Why? Well, consider the so-called walled garden that is Apple hardware and software. When it comes to Apple devices, you have a very small number of combinations of hardware. In contrast to, say, Windows. You can build your own computer and install Windows on it. The combinations of hardware and software are nearly infinite. It's the same with Android. You've got Samsung Android phones, you've got Xiaomi, you've got Huawei, you've got Motorola, you've got blah, 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 blah. There are like a million manufacturers, and they all take Android, and then they customize Android. They put their own user interface on, they remove some bits and add other bits in. Each Android phone is, well, not quite unique, but it's far more complex a system, far more complex a combination of hardware and software than a simple iPhone. What's more, every time a new iPhone comes out, usually all the politicians and world leaders run out and get the latest model, which means the people in power are probably going to be running on an iPhone that's part of an even smaller subset of hardware and software combinations. This makes the job of intelligence agencies much easier because all you have to do is hack 1 or 2 or 3 different models of phone, and boom, you've got everybody covered. But if they're all using Android, that becomes a little bit more difficult. And of course, we know from the example of the online zero-day chart that I showed, there are plenty of zero-day exploits that are known when it comes to iPhones and Apple computers. Which means, as with all other types of devices, there are also plenty of zero-day exploits that no one except the intelligence agencies know about. Because you can be sure that if you're an intelligence agency, one of your jobs is to task your hordes of engineers and coders and nerds with finding zero-day exploits that you can exploit. And of course, you're not going to tell anyone about them. You're simply going to use them to, say, spy on the entire Russian government. That's, again, everybody does that. So you see, when you stop and think about it, it's actually in the interests of both Apple and the intelligence agencies not to rock the boat. All the powerful people keep their iPhones. You've got a much more simplified group of hardware and software. It's much easier to spy on everyone. So in the end, it seems to me that the intel agencies must really, really love Apple. As the article noted, this investigation began in 2023. That was 3 years ago. The news story came up again because apparently the investigation is complete. I don't know why it took them 3 years. Whatever. But now we know that Apple devices are nowhere near secure as everyone thinks they are. And, you know, if all the intelligence agency stuff makes you kind of cringe a bit, do keep in mind that Google was founded by 2 guys, and one of them was doing his PhD thesis. And that PhD thesis, which was kind of part of the literal foundation of Google, was funded by none other than DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So when it comes to big tech and big data, usually the intel agencies have got their mitts on absolutely everything. So we probably shouldn't be surprised. But I don't know, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.